Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our Human Performance webinar. I'm your host, James Grigson, and it's my pleasure to be joined by our very special guests. We have the Australian Institute of Sport and Australian Sailing. We have Geoff White, the Physical Performance Coordinator from Australian Sailing, and we have the technical analyst of the Athlete Management System for the AIS, Owen McLean. Gents, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yeah.
So we're going to talk through some of the practical implications of visualizing some training load information and testing information within sailing. But firstly, just for context, the Australian Institute of Sport hosts 38 of their Olympic sports onto one central database, app and desktop. Since 2013, they've been using Smartabase to do so. And we're very, very happy to be able to showcase some of their work yet again with us today. One of the fascinating things that I love about what the AIS have done in housing all of their national sports into one database is the complexity within each sport. And Geoff's going to touch on this a little bit later, but within, obviously, as a central database, they're managing all sports, but then within sports, there's almost teams within those sports. And what I mean, and Geoff will elaborate on that later, but there's the national squads, you've got men's, women's, you have your developing athletes. There's so many different needs that take place even within one sport, let alone being able to service multiple sports and the multiple needs inside of that one sport. So I geek out a little bit on the complexity there, and what they're doing at the AIS is really impressive. So again, very happy to have the AIS jumping on, and very thankful for Geoff for taking us through some of the sailing workflows that they have here. So Owen, if you want to flick across, my friend, just to the first dashboard here, which is just a testing battery. Geoff, what I want you to take the viewers through, if you would like, is just to firstly tell us a little bit about the makeup there at Sailing. And then once done so, just talk me through this dashboard here and your workflow and what you're looking at when you're going through this workflow here.
Yeah, no problem at all. So, the Australian Sailing organisation, it's quite a unique one, and it's something that's taken a lot of time to get my head around, coming from different sports, working within the AIS and our state structures. We pretty much, when I talked about we, I'm talking about a sports science, sports medicine team. We pretty much look at our organisation as a team of teams. There's 10 Olympic classes that you can compete in. Therefore, each class has a national coach. We'll also have head of state coaches. Athletes will progress through our development structures and into our Australian sailing team. But there's a number of people integrated in that development process, and will continue to have something to do with an athlete all the way up to their games. So it's been really important for us to bring together a dashboard that Owen's helped us with, that allows testing to occur at different locations, that allows for different people to complete testing with a set criteria, but then also for it to all be organised onto one site, so that if our coaches want access to their information, it's readily available, or if we need to access information, it's readily available. The dashboard's been brilliant for us because, as I said, it can be done on different locations at different dates. So it really shows us the latest information across different sports science, sports medicine, including dietetics, strength conditioning, physiotherapy, physiology, and allows us to house it all in one quick, easy snapshot.
So, sorry to interrupt. I can see here there's a couple of different testing batteries, some using technology and some obviously just, kind of classic bodyweight exercises here. When you say that testing happens across multiple locations, are there any challenges there in being able to get maybe some of the resources to those locations, like a Nord board that we just saw up above?
Yeah, so that's been one of the benefits that we've been able to achieve, is that if we don't have a Nord board, so as an example, with the physiotherapy section, we're using handheld dynamometry plus something like a Nord board, and then grip strength data. So two of those items are easily can be carried by a physiotherapist, can be completed overseas or at home. Nord board, obviously not as easy. So that's where that data will be done when we can get them on a site where we have multiple locations around the country, but obviously that information wouldn't be collected when they're overseas or traveling.
Understood. So what we're looking at here is more of just a snapshot of one individual and their testing, battery, and completion. Are you able to talk to some of the performance standards that you have here? I know we chatted a little bit offline about how maybe some of the rugby people joining, or just anyone really from other sports, kind of looking at the strength metrics here going, geez, well, that's not a very good standard to have. Talk me through strength testing and testing in general in sailing and what you're looking for here and the performance standards that we have on this dashboard.
Yeah, no problem. Just to give you a snapshot, the way we look at our sport, sailing is very weight. Weight's quite important. It's not weight classed, but depending on the weight of the fleet, or combined weights of different sailors, boats you can have a benefit in stronger winds or a negative in lighter winds. So what most sailors try to do is they try to be about the average of your fleet. So coming from juniors into our senior program, usually most of our athletes have to put on body mass. So therefore, you're looking at, that's our first stage. So from a strength conditioning perspective, we're looking at hypertrophy-based training. We're looking at developing mass in correct areas of the body. We're also looking at, joint integrity and those sorts of areas that can get challenged while they're sailing. Moving to the next level, we're really looking at movement competency work. So the way this radar plot has been developed is, if you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got movements that we classify as our movement competency. So they're push-ups, back extension, single leg squats, chin-ups, those sort of movements. Movements that deal with body weight and movements that we see a strong correlation between success on water and the athlete's ability to complete 5 days worth of competition while they're sailing. Single leg squat, for example, is quite important for us. We see that the ability to control hip and knee integrity is really critical. As an athlete fatigues, or if they don't hit the kind of standards we're looking for, what we tend to find is different movements on the boat and changes in movement that will affect how the boat's sailed. And then, so therefore it becomes quite important. On the other side, some pretty standard strength training, testing, bench press, bench pull, back squat and deadlift. For me as a strength conditioning coach coming actually out of a rugby background, maximal strength really provides a strong indication of strength endurance, capacity to endure 5 days worth of racing, the ability to recover. Plus, most sailors are not only the elite athlete, but they're also the technician, the mechanic, and also the person that's having to travel, build their own boats, and move around Europe when they're not in this country. So there's a lot on our athletes in terms of what they've got to do physically, not only sail, but also set up their boat. So on the left-hand side of the radar plot is really more about their maximal capacities. This radar plot's been set up so we can show athletes if they have a tendency to be a little bit more maximally focused and don't have the movement competency. So if that blue section was shifted more to the left, we'd be having more conversations around, better hip stability, development of single leg squat, those sorts of areas. Or on the other hand, they're very good in terms of their movement competence work. They move around the boat very well, but maybe they don't have the maximal capacities to endure 5 days worth of sailing. So the radar plot was based on the work of Kelvin Giles and his movement dynamics work, if anyone's aware of that. And it's just a really clear snapshot, and it's an easy way for us to provide athletes with direction with the different levels 1 through 5.
I've seen in sport, some sports will really look at comparison between athletes, or not necessarily to standards like you have here, but between athletes. Is there much comparison happening between your athletes, or maybe looking at historical successful sailors and where your junior developers are going in comparison to what a successful sailor now was doing back at that age? Is there any sort of comparison like that taking place?
Yeah, we do have comparative data like that. One of the most unique areas or continual conversation we have with some of our sailors is that probably strength training itself, or more strength training in these terms, is relatively new to sailing. It's probably been around for the last 10 years. Sailing is a very historical sport. It definitely has an on-water focus. So we do have historical data. We do use historical data. But even though we've had a lot of success in sailing, when you compare athlete to athlete, they can be of different heights, they can be of different weights, and they can bring different strengths. So, you know, what really makes them a good sailor from one to another, even though it could be the same class, is significantly different. So therefore, you know, it's important to provide context to an athlete about what's expected of them in terms of strength gains, if they are taller or if they are shorter, those sorts of ideas. You know, riding moment, or, you know, the ability to impact the boat with body weight is affected by height. So body weights and different strength levels can change based on that.
And Owen, as someone who worked very closely to put this together with Geoff, I'm interested in maybe your perspective on what you were trying to do here in terms of the flow and some of the contextual understanding that you needed to put together this. Obviously, the people that are joining us, some of them are current clients as well. So just being able to help them maybe with some of the context that you needed to put something like this together, and some of the key features that you think have shone through on this dashboard.
Yeah, Geoff was a really good client to work with in terms of he knew exactly what he wanted, and it was really easy to pull together. And along the way and along the journey, that there was a lot to update and adjust, but we got there in the end, and I think they've got a really great dashboard that pulls all the departments together. So have this cross collaboration where everyone's entering their data and getting the information they need all in this one spot, which is typically what we're after in getting an AMS set up. And, you know, having everyone put all their information in and come through to this dashboard, and then every department's actually looking at their part of this dashboard. So the strength guys are looking at their strength section, physios are using their physio section, and they're dialing in exactly what it is that they need for their staff and athletes to see. And so having, you know, these percentage changes and all this information that was a little bit tricky to pull together with some of the calculations that we had to do in the back end, but it's actually really meaningful to them. So I think that was, yeah, quite a positive outcome for them.
And of course, Geoff, as sitting as the physical performance coordinator, it would have been important for you to see this total snapshot. And as Owen alluded to, pulling in multiple data sets from different departments, obviously physiotherapy and strength, as we saw in that diagram prior. Geoff, how is this being done beforehand? You spoke about the struggles of testing happening in different locations. Obviously, there's almost, if we are at the same location, there's always the struggle of different departments facilitating testing and trying to get it back to the one place for someone like yourself to review that type of information. How is this being done beforehand?
Testing was being completed, and each individual provider was basically keeping data on their own computers, or updating into a file into the athlete's AMS section. So they'd be attached as an attachment document. Probably the biggest differences are if coaches needed to access this data, they'd have to get in contact with us as a collective team between, you know, our sports science manager and our physiotherapist, and everybody would have to then put it down into one sheet and then send back a PDF, which is, you know, would take a couple of days to organise and move forward from there. So that's how it was done in the past. It was done pretty much like everybody starts on an Excel spreadsheet, and we create our own and we keep it on our laptop, and that's how we move it. And, you know, then you start putting in one location. We had the AMS, so that was great, but, you know, probably, you know, obviously the difference with this is one place accessible at any time by anyone that's connected to that athlete, and the most up-to-date data is in there. So if something happens today, it'll update automatically, and then, yeah, it provides our coaches with that consistent feedback on where their athletes are at and what we're doing to support their campaign.
And Owen, you had put together a nice little graph detailing maybe the time that was spent prior versus with Excel versus the time that has been saved due to this. Do you still have that there?
Yep. So this is an indication of the time saved for another dashboard that we can show, which is the individual training report. So you can see a bit of a workflow working down the screen where the coach would enter their data, the athlete would enter their data, and so on. And on the left-hand side, it's the previous time cost. So you can see on the right-hand side some significant time savings for the report manipulation and generation, and also providing coaching feedback, so we can ultimately, get this information delivered to the athlete and to the staff a lot quicker.
And as someone who would have had to potentially even be the person, maybe in previous roles, Owen, and Geoff, you might be able to touch on this as well, being the person that would have had to have manipulated those reports, do you have any idea or indication of an actual time that has been saved? An hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes? Do you have any idea at all?
I'd say, generally around an hour or half an hour to an hour. I mean, it just all depends on how many athletes you have to change the drop down for, and fiddle with the dates and make sure all the data is in there correctly, and think of all that list of things that you go through when you're manually changing that report to then send out. With this report, they're also individually generating the PDFs to put in an email. So I think it'd be close to maybe an hour or more, and that's weekly. So
I was going to say, guys, definitely from our perspective, a lot longer than that. So just in terms of, Owen's correct, about an hour or so in terms of manipulation of data. But by the time, luckily, I'm not the one that has to do this. Our physiologist, Amy, is the one that takes on all this work. But by the time she sits down, looks at the report, compares them, provides meaningful feedback to the athlete and to the coach, and then engages them for the week. Then from that goes in and actually makes meaningful change to the program. It's saving us a hell of a lot of time.
So you can see here that the initial report was a PDF that I would send out to the athletes. It would come out through Excel, be PDF'd, and then emailed out. And what we've done is basically replace that with a training dashboard. And that's basically runs on a week-to-week basis where you can control the week starting drop down, and I'll bring that up in a bit more detail in a minute. And then on the right-hand side, the group entry, which is where the coach can bring up the list of athletes that he needs to provide feedback for, punch them in straight away, press save, and it automatically feeds straight into the feedback and comments. So you can see then it comes through to the athlete or the coach on their mobile, saving them time and getting it to them quicker. So you can spend more time coaching and educating, basically.
And Owen, just quickly, there's obviously reference to Training Peaks here, and there was reference to a Nord board happening before. Just for those that don't know, how is that information getting into the system?
So the AMS system here automatically integrates with these devices and platforms, and just feeds straight into the athlete's account. Really, it's really that easy, and we can display all this information together in the one place.
And Geoff, sorry, you're doing a fair bit of your prescription on Training Peaks?
So we run quite a diverse system. So Training Peaks basically provides our athletes with the guidelines of the overall week, and we will drop strength training into there, and we will drop any physiotherapy appointments, or we'll drop on water training, and they all run Garmin watches, so they all have live feedback, whether they're cycling or they're training or they're doing whatever they want to do. I actually run off Team Builder, and our athletes are all connected to that. So that's another thing that we can integrate into the system. And we track, training loads, training volumes, and just basically development of athletes in the gym environment from that. And we also, velocity is another part of our training that we use, because obviously, moving a sail or pulling up a kite has a velocity component to it. The faster the kite goes up, the faster the boat will go. So, that's something else we use. So we've got a number of items here. There's lots of different integration, but that's how my prescription's done.
Okay. And Owen, just as a shout out for you, there was an anonymous attendee that said the app looks very slick. So well done on the creation.
I've got a big thing on making things visually engaging. I mean, people are going to use things that look really good, and then it's just a matter of making the numbers and everything around it correct as well.
Well, especially when you got someone like Geoff to work with, who you said before definitely knows what he wants. It kind of makes it easier to make things look pretty when you don't have to worry about the variables, right?
Definitely.
He's helping you put it all in. Geoff, you had spoken about load and almost segued me into this dashboard here. You had, this is a relatively new one for sailing. Owen had just put this together. So would you like to detail here what you as a coach would be looking for? And actually probably more so, there's a lot of planned versus completed. I want to understand what happens in a sailing environment and, sport to sport, planned versus completed is always varied. That there are some sports where if it's planned, it happens. Even in club, there are some clubs where if it's planned, it's happened. If we're talking AFL or anything like that, what is the emphasis here on planned versus completed, and why is it such an emphasis in sailing?
So I'm going to have to give a shout out to the rest of our sports science, sports management team. We've got some really, really good people working around us. So I'm going to be talking slightly outside of my area. This is, this is an area that's really focused on by our physiology team and their work. But, talking to the context of sailing is an extremely interesting one. Again, coming out of a teams-based background where we plan and then we can, manipulate on the run. Running a team of teams as well. We've got multiple coaches. And also the third big factor is we're very much dictated by wind. So windier days may happen later on in the day. So whether or not we execute a strength training session in the morning or a cross training session in the morning may differ based on whether we've got conditions or not. Travel is a big one for us. Coaches and athletes will travel at the moment within Australia and right now within the state to make sure we're getting the right sea conditions, right wind conditions and movement. So as soon as you start moving outside of our national training centre where we have everything, as you'd assume, now we could be, on the northern, north coast of New South Wales in quite small towns trying to look for sea state, wind state, where therefore we may not have the same strength capacities in terms of gym or what's available. So I suppose coming back to training load, lots of variables going on all the time. So we can have an idea about what we want planned, but with a forever changing environment, sometimes we're able to achieve it and sometimes we're not. Sailing's a sport where, depending on the class, a race can last between 25 and 40 minutes. You can do anywhere between 2 to 4 races a day, depending on what sort of conditions the competition has had. And then you're usually at about the 5 days of regatta. So, we're really looking at a sport that takes a large amount of volume can be up to, 25 hours worth of sailing at a regatta, but it can be also down to about, 18 to 20. So in terms of training volume, we're looking at making sure that athletes are able to cope with the duration of an event, but also able to cope with the duration of an event that maybe is of quite high intensity. So if we've got an event that has high winds and they're able to get multiple races done a day, they may get done, in 5 days, and it might be shorter windows, but the intensity of what they've got to go through is actually quite high. It's also a sport where, the bigger winds we have can be more taxing of dealing with the elements, but you might not have to do as much physical work. So moving the boat, pumping the boat, those sorts of endurance-based elements may not be needed if we've got higher winds. So we've really got these 3 different levels. You've got light wind sailing, which is very technical and tactical. You've got heavy wind sailing, which with our fast boats can definitely be like racing a car around a racetrack. And then you've got the middle one where you've got to almost manhandle the boat around the course, or woman handle. The athletes have to really drive the boat itself. So in terms of coming back to training load or referencing it, these are all the areas that we've got to consider. We also, need to be aware of what's relevant for different classes and what sort of cross training is meaningful. So that's the other part of our daily training that we need to be aware of. I think finally, training load has been, consistently across most sports, heart rate versus intensity, or duration versus intensity, or different, variables like that. We have some of our classes that use pseudo or semi-isometric contraction. So hiking athletes, so those athletes that stick their feet under the strapping and hang out off the side of a boat. So they can run very, very high heart rates without necessarily going through range. So it can actually throw out load scores quite dramatically. It can underestimate or overestimate depending on what the athlete's been doing. So there's a number of areas that we need to consider. So coming back to the plan versus actual, we can blow out definitely by up to about 20% sometimes, but it all comes back to the coaching and the communication and the relationship we have with coaches and athletes about daily conversation. How are they feeling? How are they coping with training? And then continuing to adapt and manipulate as we go forward.
Mother Nature, hey, the ultimate variable.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
And I'm actually interested. I know this is some dummy data that Owen's popped in there for the feedback and comments. Owen did talk about it previously, about the manual entry of feedback around load. I'm interested, and maybe you might not be the one to be having these types of conversations, but how much are you educating your athletes on what these types of graphs would look like? Is this something that's athlete facing and something that you're communicating to your athletes about in terms of their session load and tapering and things of that nature?
Absolutely, 100%. So we use this on a weekly basis. In the past, as Owen has shown, they were PDFs that were sent out. Now this is on our dashboard so that the coaches we can have these conversations with athletes. You know, we still look at significant increases and decreases in load from week to week. The fatigue, it can change athletes' fatigue state quite dramatically. Depending on the regatta that's coming up, the expected wind conditions, the flights, the travel on ground and all those sorts of things, different manipulations of the planned training volumes will be made. And then also for us, it depends on what level our athletes are at. So we've got some quite senior athletes. Athletes are around in sailing for a very long time. You know, you've got in Rio, there was an athlete who was in his early 50s who won a gold medal in a catamaran class. So, you know, you can be around for a very, you know, it's not a sport that you age out of very easily. So these are all factors in terms of what training volume is prescribed, what modalities are being used to create those training scores, those volume load scores, and then also what's being done on the water. So in terms of education for athletes, it's critical because it's different class to class, skipper to crew, and then also age of athlete and development stage.
And Owen, as someone who put this together and working off of previously what was an Excel sheet and then having to translate that into the dashboard that we see now, talk me through some of the elements and what you were doing when you were putting this together. Obviously, just an individual view, there's and a historical view of that individual. Do you mind just detailing some of the elements that we're seeing here?
Yeah, so there was a bit of reverse engineering going on from the Excel spreadsheet, but it was really easy to do that in the Smartabase system with all the data flowing through from training peaks and capturing that for each athlete. But it's, I think, as I was saying before, making this, you know, visually engaging in terms of the colors and the way it's laid out, but then being able to interact with it as well. So I think you might have been seeing when I was clicking around as Geoff was talking, just to be able to click on this bike session and see exactly what it was and the loads and times, you know, associated with that session, or this strength one here where they completed it in their home gym, obviously with COVID and all that going on. And these donuts are also interactive where you can click on the bike and it shows all the bike sessions that they completed that make up that 63% that's written there. And these main two tables here are the ones that are really important, I think, where it details what was planned, what was completed, the difference, and then the 12-week average, which is highlighted in the graph below, and then week-to-week difference that Geoff mentioned before. So trying to keep it as simple as possible so that everyone, you know, who's looking at this dashboard can understand it. So it sort of flows down where, you know, what they've completed is week to week for the last 12 weeks here. And then you can see the weekly bars here in the acute, how it's affecting their chronic load. So you can see that this fake athlete has lost a bit of training in the last couple of weeks, so their chronic load's coming down. But yeah, I think like Geoff said, just the ability to capture what it was that they were doing in Excel and be able to visually represent it here in the dashboard just creates some massive time savings for them.
And just to geek out a little bit on the dashboard creation and dashboard flow, if I can, just for people that are watching that are users of any sort of visualization suite, having a viewpoint, and Owen, please back me up or tell me I'm wrong here. Having a flow from whether it's a day to a week to a month to an extended period of time like 12 weeks is really important, especially for the viewers. And what we're seeing here is exactly that. We've kind of got a daily comment, and then we've got the weekly load, the actual workouts that they did across the week and the percentage breakdowns in those pie charts left and right. And then we flow down to the last 12 weeks. Geoff, you may or not, you'd mentioned before that the train load and how you guys are visualizing that isn't necessarily your 100% area, but is there any reason why it's a 12-week review of training load? Is that anything to do with, is that just a preference, or is it sailing specific? Is there any reason why it's a 12-week review of data there?
No, I think it's a nice snapshot to see, what's been happening. We tend to have different, although we struggle to have an off-season or a pre-season, we definitely have different periods within the year, and it does come down to about 4 different periods. So I think it's just nicely aligned, to be honest, with, what our athletes are doing, whether they're in Europe or whether they're back home, and then also what looks great, and then what is actually meaningful, sometimes going back too far. You just start muddying the waters. It's really about what are they doing in the moment and what's been happening lately and what's coming up.
That's fantastic, gentlemen. Before we wrap up, is there anything that I want to know you had some slides prepared as well, and Geoff, any additional commentary that you might not have got off your chest? Is there anything else that you wanted to comment on the 2 dashboards that we've seen today? And Owen, your slides there, is there anything else that you wanted to present here?
No, I got through my slides. That was the final one. It was just more of a holding slide at the end that we missed out on.
Okay. Nothing special.
Yeah, no, all good. I appreciate the opportunity, guys, because this has been brilliant for us.
Yeah, really good user case for the way we've been able to collaborate with the sport and deliver on what it is that they need.
So for those that are watching live, we're going to go to questions. Probably have about 5 minutes here left for questions. We did have an anonymous question come through. Geoff, they do apologise if this was already covered, but they just wanted to get a quick recap on how many athletes and teams are managed inside of this system. And is there a different level of reporting for different athletes?
So yeah, definitely. Look, any testing or information that we collect within our national or states environment actually does get entered into the system. Whether or not we provide that feedback directly to the athlete at the time is something that that's what we choose to do. So this level is definitely at our top end, what we call our Australian sailing team, Australian sailing squad levels, people that are involved with us at the national level and competing internationally. Younger athletes are definitely data's collected and put into the system. And, for those that are really show us the intent to progress and really love feedback and information, we've got it there to provide them. It also provides us with a long athletic development progression. We've got girls that I've been working with now for 3 or 4 years who've had significant progression in terms of, going from not being able to do a chin up to, now at 15 to 20 kind of chin ups. So providing them with that, because it does take so long and because it provides them with that feedback of success, it's really, really good for us. So in terms of the information definitely goes in, whether or not we provide them with it every week, definitely not. We have significant numbers of athletes, across our system, from our state systems and into our national system. So, you're looking up to about 190 athletes. And then you're looking at a significant amount of staffing in terms of that. So if you look at strength conditioning, physiology, psychology, what we call athlete and wellness and engagement, and then, you do that at a national level, but then that all filters down as well. And then you've got coaches for every class and then coaches for state. So I couldn't actually give you a number off the top of my head, but it's in excess of 200 people that have something to do with with these dashboards with these athletes, and I haven't even included medical staff. So that's, you know, a different section as well.
There's a bit on, as we say.
It's a bit on, and having a system that allows us to manage that has been really critical, because even with team sports and being involved with sports that you'd think are quite easy to align, we've had problems doing this in the past. So coming to a sailing structure where it is really a big team of teams, and then we all buy into one system has provided that flow of information and communication has been great.
And just for context for that anonymous attendee, that there's 38 different Olympic sports inside of the entire system that we are looking at here, and sailing is one of those 38. So any further questions being or wanting to have been asked, please raise your hand or put it in the Q&A. We do have one scheduled for about a month's time. We might have another one in a fortnight. Just wanted to thank everyone for joining. I know there's US people that have gotten up early. I can see people there from Korea. Hello, Danny. Good to see you. And we know that the recording gets out to many people across the world. So thank you for watching the recording. If I'm just going to leave it, we'll try and ramble on a little bit more for a couple more minutes if people are typing away for any questions. But for Owen and Geoff, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming on. Geoff, thank you for your time, mate. Owen, thanks for the presentation. It's a really good dashboard together. And for that, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.